Welcome to the Wendi Cooper Show. Speaking of age, this is where we have conversations with remarkable people over 50. So I want to just apologize to everyone for not being around for the past couple of months. I know there's been a large gap in my podcast, and that's kind of a no-no to do that. I do know that because I've been doing this for a long time, but I did have some personal issues in my life that I hope are resolved, and I will be a little more regular. Here's the reality though. I do Facebook Live shows every so often, and they are kind of funny. And I do have several of them on my C Spot Talk, the letter C Spot Talk Facebook page. So I'd love for you to find me there and watch the videos. I also have a YouTube channel where I have oodles and oodles of past shows, streaming, and all of my podcasts from the Wendi Cooper Show, which is formerly known as Generation Jones, Too Young to Be Old. So with getting that out of the way, I'm glad everyone is listening, and I am super happy to bring you Rich Karlgaard today. He's a best-selling author, and he has been the publisher at Forbes for 21 years, I believe. He does go through his background. What I did with this show is a little bit different. I made sure to, Rich and I's conversation was a very long one. So I wanted to be able to extract from the conversation all of the really good nuggets. And so that's what I did. And I found that the things that really resonated with me, and which is what we focused on. I pretty much cut myself out of this entire interview, but we focused on the following things. Of course, what inspired Rich to write the book, how he went about that, what a late bloomer is, and then also self-doubt, reinvention, and what he found the meaning of wisdom was for people who are older. It's fascinating. I have to tell you, from a personal level of not having a higher education, I went through my entire career, and I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. I went through my entire career feeling inferior because I didn't have a higher education. But when I read Rich's book, Late Bloomers, The Power of Patience in a World Obsessed with Early Achievement. Let me say that again. The power of patience in a world obsessed with early achievement. It's so powerful, that tagline, and it does wrap it all up, because I was not an early achiever. I was a very late achiever. In fact, after reading Rich's book, I believe that my best years are yet to come, and I'm 64 years old. So I hope that gives a lot of hope to a lot of people out there, because once you understand that there is absolutely nothing wrong with being a late bloomer, that being a late bloomer is actually pretty amazing, you can kind of settle in and understand, and maybe even find your path to reinvention. That's what happened to me, was I started to realize after listening to Rich's book that I am such a late bloomer that the ideas that I have today at 64 are probably the ideas that are going to be my biggest and my best and my most successful moving forward. So what do you think about that? Okay. We're going to dive into everything, and Rich is pretty much gonna rule this interview. You can find his book on Amazon. You can find it at Barnes & Noble. It comes in hardback, Audible, Kindle, you name it. If you want to throw some money at Jeff Bezos, absolutely go on Amazon. I can't even say it. It scares me that much. Go on Amazon and download it right away, instantly on Audible. That is what I did. It is not read by Rich. It is read by someone else, but he does an awesome job. For those of you that are really into the audio space, that I think is very important when you're downloading a book. Need I say anything more to Scott Galloway, who the only reason I downloaded his book was because because I thought he would be reading it, and he's hysterical, and it just didn't work, because somebody else read Professor Galloway from NYU's book. It just didn't make any sense. Maybe one day he'll be listening to this show. But anyway, Rich does a really great job. It's in a nutshell. It's only going to run us probably around a maximum of 30 minutes. So I might interject here and there, but let's let it roll. Enjoy. And I will see you on the other side of this conversation.
Thank you, Wendi. It's a different kind of a book for me. It grew out of a personal sense of mission. This is my 27th year at Forbes. It's my 21st year as the publisher of Forbes. All my previous books had been about business, and this grew out of a sense of that I had to write this book because I was a late bloomer myself, which I describe in the book, but I came from a different era where I felt it was easier to be a late bloomer, and we didn't have social media that would track, all parts of our lives. We didn't have the intense pressure that we do today on the SAT test and your grades and where you went to university. And that's the kind of pressure I see in society today. I live in Los Altos, California. It's 5 miles from Stanford University, so it's the heart of Silicon Valley. And you could say that Silicon Valley, but you could say that all affluent, particularly coastal cities, have this aspirational mania for teens and young adults that parents and the school system is putting on them, and it's causing a heck of a lot of dysfunction, heartbreak, and the sad irony of it all is that neuroscience and psychology say quite the opposite about our ability to bloom throughout multiple decades of our lifetimes and to become serial bloomers.
Hey, it's me. I'm back. So you probably have already guessed, or I've already told you, I'm editing this thing as we go along, and this is a conversation that goes on for a very long time. So this is where I'm basically thanking Rich for giving me the ability to really reframe my future, because in listening to his book and listening to what he has to say and listening to all the science that it's based on, I did realize that, being an early achiever or even being a parent that didn't push my kids to be early achievers and felt guilty for that, that it's absolutely ridiculous and that other people feel the same way as I do.
Well, good. Thank you so much for saying that, Wendi. I've had numerous experiences where people at bookstores, when I've given a reading or I've done an onstage interview, where people will say, thank you for giving me permission to look at this in a new way. Sometimes it's about themselves. Often it's about parents who don't know which way to turn. They have a late blooming teenager. They have a young adult that is not, transitioning into adulthood very well, and they don't know which way to turn. They don't know whether to put more discipline on that child or to loosen up. And I spent 4 years doing the research on this book before I ever wrote much, because I'm an outsider. I'm a late bloomer myself, but I'm not a professional psychologist. I'm certainly not a neuroscientist. But I wanted to make everything in my book, Late Bloomers, defensible by the science in neuroscience, brain science, and in psychology, but interpreted through an outsider who himself was a late bloomer and seeing all the pain and guilt and shame of people who are late bloomers. And that was my motivation to write the book. And as you know, by listening to the book, I spent the first couple chapters really railing against how we got into the situation where we so overvalue early blooming and discount late blooming, and then transition into all what neuroscience actually has to say about it, which is very positive, and then spend the last third of the book talking about, well, it wasn't our fault that we were late bloomers, but we might have some cleaning up to do in our lives. So we may be inflicted with greater than average self-doubt. We may not know how to strategically quit something that no longer makes sense. We may have to repot our lives to different friendships, different colleagues, different zip codes. And so, but it was a joy. It was a joy both to do the research and to find out all the positive things about late blooming and serial late blooming. And it was a joy to finally sit down and then write the thing.
It's me again. So here's the key, is that when I first heard about Rich's book, I heard him on a podcast, and he was talking about self-doubt. And self-doubt is a chapter in the book that is highly based on research, but it is also something that so resonates with me. And then to realize that other people also of great character and great stature in life also have a lot of self-doubt. Now, in the book, he gives you, for instances, and he also will talk about how he didn't write a how-to or a self-help book, but the chapter on self-doubt is there are solutions given and reasons for self-doubt and how you can make that work for you. I found it fascinating. I loved it, and this is and I brought that up because I feel it is such an important part of the psychosis of being basically a late bloomer, not understanding that being a late bloomer doesn't mean that you're a failure. Being a late bloomer means that you're probably pretty darn awesome.
Yeah. So the how-to culture will tell you to fake it till you make it, to puff yourself up, to improve your posture, all of those kinds of things. And I grant you there's some virtue in doing that. I think those are the kind of tactics that can get you through a pinch when you're feeling particularly low or nervous. But as a long-term strategy, it's not self-sustaining, because I look at self-doubt like bad weather. It's going to show up. In fact, it's worse than bad weather. It's like it's going to show up at the worst possible time, right? You're doing a job interview or you're trying to sell a product, and all of a sudden you're afflicted with self-doubt. So I looked into the psychology of this, and I talked to some really smart people like Carol Dweck, who teaches psychology at Stanford. She wrote a great book a dozen years ago called Mindset. And I began to develop an idea from that we need to make friends with our self-doubt. Self-doubt, as Carol Dweck said, it's like the annoying friend who shows up at the worst possible time, but that friend, that self-doubt, is delivering valuable information. And we have to learn the habit and the techniques of being able to extract the value from the information that is being delivered by our self-doubt without having that self-doubt infect our self-worth. That's the mistake we make. What is the self-doubt really telling me? Maybe it is telling me I'm not fully prepared. Maybe it is telling me to take a deep breath. Maybe it's telling me that I've overworked this situation and I'm tight, and I need to be looser about this speech that I'm going to give, or this sales presentation, or this job interview. It may be telling you a lot of things. But the whole point is to step back and look at it clinically, as you would imagine your best friend came to you and was saying, I'm full of self-doubt. You're not going to tell that person, well, that's because you're really not much as a person. You always blow it in key situations. You're way, this opportunity is way beyond you. This is the kind of thing we tell ourselves. We'd never tell a good friend that kind of stuff. A good friend, you'd have a discussion. Well, what exactly are you feeling? And you might get to, well, you haven't had enough sleep lately. Maybe you need a partner who complements you, because everybody's good in certain things and weak in others. And maybe if you're starting a business, the self-doubt is really, I'm no good in sales, or I'm no good at bookkeeping, or something like that. Well, then, your self-doubt has delivered useful information. If you're willing to see it, maybe you need to go out and find a partner. So that's the way to deal with self-doubt, and it goes to how we talk to ourselves, and learning positive self-talk that is realistic positive self-talk, not over the moon, BS-y kind of optimism.
Okay, so I totally got what Rich was saying, but then I posed a question to him about myself and how I always felt about the fact that I had created a great company before anybody else even thought of the idea. It was a full service, creative, direct response company. And I built that into something of what I would like to call a bit iconic. But I always wondered how great it could have been if I had not been a late bloomer, but a young achiever. So here's what Rich had to say.
I don't know. I mean, you may have never fallen into that opportunity if you'd gone to school. You may have had this very narrow way that you would have looked at your life. You may have wound up being an unhappy lawyer. I mean, there are countless paths. I mean, as I hear your story, well, first of all, I think of the great advertising icon David Ogilvy. Remember Ogilvy on advertising and all the books that he wrote? David Ogilvy never went to university. I mean, he had to work. He was a working class kid in England. He came off as a very aristocratic guy, right? I mean, he dressed the part and he smoked the pipe and all that kind of stuff. Drove a Bentley or a Rolls because he had the account. But he never went to university. Somebody who's our age, but he's not our age because he died, Steve Jobs, famously, he started out at Reed College, a liberal arts school in Portland, Oregon, and then he dropped out. He didn't like the classes, and he hated how much his working class parents were spending to send him to Reed. So he dropped out and started auditing classes, and he started taking classes like calligraphy. So the iconic person in the whole personal computer industry, and then the mobile phone industry, was a college dropout who took calligraphy classes. But of course, when Apple came out with the Macintosh in 1984, you could see right away that it was the first personal computer that could be the platform for publishing, because it had all these different kind of type fonts. And that grew directly out of his love of typography that he discovered at Reed College, auditing classes. Never any official recognition that he was a master in calligraphy. So I don't know. You described those accomplishments, and I'll bet you they wouldn't have even come across if you'd gone down a different track. The other thing that inspires me about your story is that you used everything that you've had. I mean, nothing that you've done in your life has been wasted. You may wound up at Apollo. In some serendipitous moment. A lot of serendipity matters, luck matters, but you learn things while you were there. Did you know that you were on a track to go into, the direct response industry and to become a mover and shaker there? No. I think a lot of late bloomers are discoverers. Early bloomers tend to they have a lot of focus. And one of the things that irritates me today about this mania for early achievement, the pressure that we put on teens and young adults, is it's asking them to trade their youthful curiosity for determined focus. Some people are naturally focused and motivated. They're good at that. Late bloomers, my speculation, but all the evidence seems to point that way, we're life's discoverers. For us, it's just important to keep moving forward and with some sense of confidence, some techniques of how to deal with our self-doubt, et cetera, in the right city with the right set of friends. So we need to change those. And then we'll discover things. We'll learn things along the way. And I think that this country, we've lost faith in that process, that people are capable of learning things if they're moving forward, as opposed to, we need to send them out into the world at age 18 or 22 or 25 fully armed for something when they may not even know what they want to do.
At this point, I really just wanted to grab the guy and give him a kiss, because to call late bloomers life's discoverers, it couldn't have been said better. So that brought me to wisdom. Wisdom is a big catchphrase these days, and everyone is using it. So I asked Rich, because remember, I've read the book, to go over the definition of wisdom, because I thought it was rather fascinating, and it is based on neuroscience. So By the way, if you're over 50, you still have many years to peak your wisdom. Here's what Rich has to say.
Yeah, I'll give you a neurological explanation of wisdom as told to me when I did the research of the book by a neuroscientist out of NYU named Elkanan Goldberg, who's in his 70s now. And in his late 60s, he began to notice that he was having more useful intuitions, and that his intuitions were getting him where he wanted to go on a problem faster and just as accurately as if he methodically tore the problem apart and looked at it in a very logical way. So he began to investigate this, and he has a theory. And it's not scientifically proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, but he is an esteemed neuroscientist from NYU. And that is the networks between connect the two sides of the brain, the intuitive and creative side, and then the side of memory and logic, that these networks keep developing throughout our healthy lives. So barring a stroke or Alzheimer's or something like that, they keep developing, nearly all the way to the end of our lives. Now, we must stay healthy as we can, and we must stay mentally engaged and not throw in the towel and just become a couch potato and all of that kind of stuff. But if we do that, then these networks continue to develop. And so what he says is wisdom is really a conversation that's having along these networks between the intuitive and creative side and the logical side that stores all memory, the salience network. And that's his theory on why in his late 60s and now in his 70s, he suddenly, recognizes that he has better, more accurate intuitions. So everything that people say, or the young people say, or the popular culture says about, what do they say about people after 50? Well, we're incapable of learning stuff. We're not that quick, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's absolute poppycock. There's one other study that I want to cite that everybody should know about. And you can look it up, you can Google it. Just Google the name Laura Germain, Germine. She was a researcher out of Harvard and had a colleague named Josh Hartshorn out of MIT. And they're both doing postdoc work at Massachusetts General Hospital. And they asked the question, at what age do we cognitively peak? And the answer is far more complex and ultimately far more hopeful than anybody really knows. Because first, it's complex because what cognitive ability are you talking about? If you are talking about rapid cognitive processing speed and working memory, the things that would make you a great software programmer under a time crunch or a great high-frequency trader on Wall Street, yeah, those things tend to peak when we're earlier, late teens, 20s. What peaks in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s are neurological attributes that support better pattern recognition, deeper pattern recognition, communication skills, leadership skills, the ability to stay calm under pressure. All of those things get better even as we lose a little bit in sort of the rapid fire stuff. How fast do we lose stuff once we're at peak? Very little. We lose, in terms of rapid cognitive processing speed, about 0.2 to 0.4% per year. So negligible. I mean, hardly anything at all. So that which we lose at a much slower rate than popular culture thinks we do. And that which we gain is, creates our ability to navigate a complex world much more effectively and communicate and lead than we're given credit for.
Oh, those darn societal stigmas that are attached to getting older. It's just so ridiculous. This is what is so great about Rich Karlgaard's book. I just wish he had an easier last name to say. My mouth doesn't want to form those letters. But anyway, that was awesome. And every time I hear the clip, which I've now heard several times because that's the edit process, I want to just, do that bam, bam, bam. Take that, you ageist society out there. We are worthy, and we are smart, and we are employable, and we rule as far as this whole conversation that, I had with Rich, and why I was so anxious about interviewing him is because I know most of you aren't going to probably pick up his book, but you really should, because it's packed full of information that is really going to help you. So without further ado, we're probably going to wrap this up, but I had to ask Rich about reinvention, because everyone says over 50, you need to reinvent yourself. Well, reinvention is a very difficult proposition. And where do you start? Where do you go? How do you become an entrepreneur and market yourself after being in the corporate world for so long? So this is a big question, and I asked Rich.
Yeah, I think you have to lean into who you're becoming and not try to recapture who you were, for example, because your passions and your purpose are evolving throughout your life. Your skills are evolving. You're moving from, typical trajectories. A young person can become a specialist in something. Not all do. Late bloomers don't always. But you move toward in this direction of general intelligence and general, ability to see deeper patterns and stuff like that. So everything about you is evolving. And so leaning into who you're becoming is what I suggest to people. I feel sorry for people who, you hear this all the time, and people who spent their life in a corporate career, didn't have to learn anything about marketing themselves. And then we'll say something like, I sent out 300 resumes. Well, where did you get the idea that sending out a resume to some anonymous HR department, was the way to do that? And, it's hard to tell somebody at that point that you're going about this wrong. And so then, the popular solution of several years ago is you need to network more. You need to, well, if you're networking with people who have also lost their job, these are people that might be pulling you down. It could become some giant pity party. Nobody likes to be told this, Wendi, but a lot of people in that situation who are past the age of 50 and struggling to find out what their next act is, you have to do an inventory, and not necessarily a psychological inventory or keep a journal, but what are you really good at? And how can you take what you're good at and move it to an adjacent space that somebody will find valuable? That has two components to it. One is imagining the scenarios where you can apply what you like to do and what you're good at in maybe ways that aren't exactly the same as before. But it also means doing the research to find out, who might benefit from that. This is going to come off as a little more hard-ass than the tone I tried to convey in the book. But when people say that they sent out 300 resumes and didn't get a response, I think to myself, didn't you do the homework? That is, think of a company that sounds intriguing to you. Now use Mr. Google to find out everything you know about that company, who its key people are there any connections there, what do they do, and what are their problems? What are their problems? That's, any large company is covered by analysts, financial analysts, other kinds of analysts. You can find out where a company's strong and where it is weak. I guarantee you any company out there that has a weakness is going to try to figure out how they can solve a particular problem that will make them strong where they're weak. So you really have to do both. You have to do that inventory of what you're really good at and how the adjacent spaces that you could move it to, and then who has use for that kind of skill. And it's often people who have a problem. Something is not happening in that company or organization that they need to have done. And if you can be that person who narrowly comes in, with a narrow answer that can be put to use right away, that's better than sending out 300 resumes by a long shot.
Okay, if you ask me, and nobody's asking me, but if you ask me, sending out 300 resumes is not something on my bucket list. So, and plus, there is such a difficulty in sending out resumes if you're over 50. Oh, forget about it. So I think what Rich is really saying about reinvention, as opposed to sending out resumes and listening to what everybody is saying about networking, is find the pain point within an organization by doing research, seeing if you have that skill set that you can then leverage to make to become that problem solver. Okay. My thing is with this whole reinvention, craze that's going on is, just reinvent yourself. Reinventing yourself is not easy. Reinventing yourself as an entrepreneur, because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about stepping away from the corporate safe place, stepping away from what you've always done, and tapping into that skill that you can then offer as a personal brand, basically, and say, I know you have this problem in your organization and I can fix it. But what that really takes is understanding how to market yourself and how to get your feet in the door and who to go to. I think we can all research who needs our skills, but do we have the confidence? Are we full of self-doubt? Do we have the right business card? Do we have the right website? Where do we send people? Is our LinkedIn profile done properly? If they ask me for a resume and I've worked for a corporation for 35 years, what am I going to say on my resume? I worked here for 35 years. There just needs to be more information on really how to reposition yourself over 50 to make it easier to blend into that gig economy. I've been doing it for 30 years, so I don't think it's so difficult, but I do understand how difficult it is for other people. So with that being said, Rich did wish us all a happy 4th of July. That is when we recorded this show. And I want to just sign off now because I got a bunch of people that are going to probably make some noise in the background in a couple of minutes. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes. Wendi, this is the Wendi Cooper Show. I am your host, and we do try to speak of age and bring you great information. You can also follow me on Facebook because I do Facebook Live shows, and they're kind of fun. And WendiCooper.com is where you'll find everything about this show. But you already know because you're already listening to it. Make sure to share. Follow me on Facebook, C-Spot Talk. I am on Instagram at IAM_ageless. And I would love any suggestions that you might have. And thank you so much for listening. I also want to thank Tom Morsey for his help in everything that he does for me, and let you know that this episode and all episodes were produced by C-Spot Run Productions. Thank you for listening.